218 BC, war came to the Mediterranean. Long had the ancient Phoenician Empire of Carthage been wary of the rising power of Rome, and now hostilities between these two foremost factions of the day once more came to a head. This new conflict, later remembered as the Second Punic War, would rage on for close to 2 decades to come, pitting not only the two city-states against one another, but also a plethora of the surrounding nations and tribes. The First Punic War had ended just over 2 decades earlier in 241 BC, with an inconclusive Roman victory, yet many amongst the Carthaginian political elite still felt cheated by this result. Chief amongst them was the famed general Hamilcar Barca, who hadn't ever really been defeated, continuing his guerrilla war of resistance against the Romans on Sicily, despite a lack of support from his government in Carthage. In 218 BC, it was Hamilcar's son, Hannibal, one of his so-called lion's brood, specifically raised with the intention of destroying Rome, who crossed over the Alps into Italy at the head of a vast army, thus bringing to fruition a plan likely masterminded by his father years before. Yet ultimately, after everything that happened in Italy, Hannibal's epic string of victories at Cannae, the Trebia River, and Lake Trasimene, it was hundreds of miles to the south, in the North African lands adjacent to Carthage, that the war would ultimately be decided. It was there that a young leader of the eastern Numidian tribes, then known as the Massyles, controversially switched sides at the very height of the fighting to support the Romans against his former vassal lords. It was Massæsyles' elite Numidian cavalry, once a mainstay in the Carthaginian army, who would decide the fate of the war. The Second Punic War was fought not just in Italy, but on many different fronts. For those involved, it was a truly global conflict, encompassing the majority of the known world. It was total war, with hundreds of thousands fully committed on either side. Absolutely everyone in each nation contributing towards the final victory over their arch-enemies. In Spain, the Carthaginian generals Mago and Hasdrubal fought against Scipio Africanus for control of the peninsula. In Italy, of course, Hannibal crossed the Alps and fought a long series of battles against the Roman Fabian strategy of scorched earth that sought to drive him out. To a certain extent, it was a dynastic conflict, with two influential families pitted against each other generation after generation. Yet nonetheless, the war would be decided on African soil, on the plains outside of Carthage, with the integral involvement of the Numidians. Massæsyles had been born back in around 238 BC as the son of Gaia, the chieftain of the Massyles, a client state of Carthage at the time. His father was then the leader of the eastern Numidian tribes. They bordered Carthage to the east, and the Massæsyles, the western Numidian tribes, to the west, in modern-day Algeria. Raised in the metropolis of Carthage, then one of the most powerful cities in the world, Massæsyles went to war aged just 17 to lead an army of his kinsmen and other Carthaginian auxiliaries between 215 and 212 BC against Syphax, the king of the Massæsyles, when he allied himself with the Romans. Massæsyles eventually triumphed against Syphax and was afterwards betrothed to the daughter of the Carthaginian general Hasdrubal Gisco as a reward. After his victory in Africa, Massæsyles was posted to Spain, where he personally commanded the Numidian cavalry against the Romans, contributing to the Carthaginian victories at Castulo and Illorca in 211 BC. After the Carthaginian general Hasdrubal Barca departed Spain for Italy to support his brother Hannibal, Massæsyles found himself in charge of all of the Carthaginian cavalry in Spain. He fought a successful guerrilla campaign against the Roman commander Scipio Africanus, whilst Mago Barca and Hasdrubal Gisco trained new armies. In 206, both generals returned to Spain and linked up with Massæsyles to meet Scipio Africanus at the Battle of Ilipa. The battle was a disaster for Carthage, and their power in Spain was permanently broken as a result. Meanwhile, back in Africa, Gaia died in 206, leaving a power struggle between his sons, Massæsyles and Azalces. Syphax, now an ally of Carthage having switched sides, was able to conquer considerable part of eastern Numidia as a result. Now, with the conquest of his homelands to contend with, and correctly surmising that the Romans were now winning the war after Scipio's victory in Spain and the successful implementation of the Fabian strategy in mainland Italy, Massinissa decided to make a bold decision and also switch sides in the opposite direction to Syphax, this time to support the Romans. Scipio Africanus promised to support Massinissa's bid for power in Africa, and also agreed to release his nephew, who had been taken captive in battle in Spain. Syphax, meanwhile, solidified his alliance with the Carthaginians by marrying Hasdrubal Gisco's daughter. Syphax was successfully able to drive Massinissa out of power until Scipio finally arrived in Africa in 203 BC. It was then, in 203, near Utica in northern Africa, that a great battle was fought between Rome and Carthage, with Syphax and the Massæsyles on one side, and Massinissa and the Massæsyles on the other. The Battle of the Great Plains was yet another victory for Scipio, now supported by the very same Numidian cavalry that had once proved such an issue to deal with for the Romans. The final nail in the Carthaginian coffin came in 202 BC, when Hannibal finally returned to Africa, after having never lost a battle in the entire 16-year duration of the war. Hannibal was finally defeated there at Zama, and as a result, Massinissa was crowned as the undisputed king of Numidia. Massinissa had commanded not just his own 6,000 Numidian cavalry at Zama, but also 3,000 mounted Romans, taking overall command over Scipio's entire right wing. Scipio had even delayed the engagement for hours in order to allow Massinissa to join him. Such was his respect for the Numidian cavalry commander. At the height of the fighting, as the battle had hung in the balance, Massinissa's cavalry, having driven the fleeing Carthaginian horsemen away, returned to the battlefield to masterfully smash into the back of the Carthaginian lines in the most decisive moment of the entire battle, and possibly the war. Carthage was defeated, thus ending the Second Punic War for good, with a definitive Roman victory. In return for his loyal service to Rome, Massinissa received the kingdom of Syphax in addition to his own lands, thus uniting them to become the first king of a unified Numidia. In the years that followed, Massinissa, now king of both the eastern and western Numidians, showed unconditional loyalty to Rome, gradually strengthening his own position and that of his fledgling nation in the process. His position in Africa was further strengthened by a clause in the peace treaty of 201 between Rome and Carthage, which prohibited Carthaginians from going to war, even in self-defence, without Roman permission. This enabled Massinissa to encroach on the remaining Carthaginian territory left around the city, as long as he judged that Rome wished to see Carthage further weakened. Thus, with Roman backing, Numidia flourished in the lands west of Carthage, with Cirta, present-day Constantine, as its capital city. Massinissa's chief aims were to build a strong and unified state from the semi-nomadic Numidian tribes. To that end, he introduced Carthaginian agricultural techniques and forced many Numidians to settle as peasant farmers, thus earning himself the reputation amongst Roman writers as a prominent founder of towns and cities. Major Numidian settlements founded in this time included Capsa, Thugga, Bulla Regia, and Hippo Regius. Ancient accounts suggest that Massinissa lived beyond the age of 90 and was apparently still personally leading the armies of his kingdom until his death. The kingdom he established survived as a nominally independent client state of Rome until 40 BC, when it was finally incorporated into the empire, which now spanned much of the known world in the aftermath of the Punic Wars.